Assalamu alaikum dear students, hope you all doing well. Today we are going to discuss about carbon cycle. In the previous lecture we studied about biogeochemical cycles and we described the nitrogen cycle. Today we will try to describe the carbon cycle, that's how this carbon is circulated between the abiotic and the biotic components of the ecosystem. That means किस तरह से carbon जो है circulate होता है between from the biotic to the abiotic component and from the abiotic component back to the biotic component. First of all, let's try to understand in what forms this carbon is present in the abiotic components of the ecosystem. किस form में present होता है in the abiotic component, that's the living, non-living component of the ecosystem. First of all, let's talk about atmosphere. Atmosphere की बात करें तो carbon is present in the combined state, that's carbon dioxide. So this carbon is present in the combined state in the atmosphere, that's carbon dioxide. When we talk about soil, it's present in different forms like elemental form, that's diamond and graphite. चाहे as carbonate भी present होता है inside the earth, like calcium carbonate or sodium bicarbonate. Now let's talk about living organisms or the biotic component of the ecosystem, how in what form this carbon is present in the biotic components of the ecosystem. Carbon जो है, it's present almost in all biomolecules like proteins, carbohydrates, fats, nucleic acids and vitamins. इन सब में जो है कार्बन प्रेजेंट होता है. Now let's try to understand how this carbon enters the biotic world, that's how this carbon from the atmosphere enters into the living organisms and organisms give back this carbon into the atmosphere. You already know that plants use carbon dioxide in the process of photosynthesis. And photosynthesis में end product क्या होता है? Glucose. So plants use this carbon dioxide which is present in the atmosphere, and then by the process of photosynthesis they make their food in the form of glucose. Glucose क्या है? Glucose is carbohydrate और glucose की formula क्या है? C6H12O6. That means glucose जो है उसमें भी carbon present होता है. After that, these plants are consumed by different animals, and this is how this carbon enters the whole biotic world, that's all living organisms. After that, when these plants and animals, when they die or when they release some excretory products, this carbon enters the soil in the form of organic matter, जिसको हम organic matter कहते हैं. After that, you already know that when these plants and animals, when they die and under high pressure and high temperature, they are converted into fossil fuels, that's coal and petroleum. Plants are converted into coal and mostly animals are converted into petroleum. So these plants and animals, they form fossil fuels, and you already know how these fossil fuels are formed under high pressure and high temperature. So this is how this carbon enters the biotic world, how this carbon from the atmosphere enters the biotic component of the ecosystem, that's the living organisms. Now let's try to understand how this carbon is given back to the atmosphere. कौन कौन सी processes हैं जिनसे ये carbon वापस atmosphere में चला जाता है. First of all, let's talk about the plants. These plants, by the process of respiration, they release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. or when these plants die, these are decomposed and the carbon is released into the atmosphere. And when we talk about animals, they also respire. They also respire and release carbon dioxide. You already know that. In the process of respiration, oxygen is utilized and carbon dioxide is released. So this is how these animals release the carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. And when we talk about the fossil fuels, these fossil fuels are burnt in the vehicles or in the industries. And this burning of fossil fuel again releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. The same process occurs inside the water bodies, जहाँ पे different living organisms होते हैं जिनमें carbon dioxide present होता है. First of all, by the process of photosynthesis, this carbon dioxide enters the aquatic life, and after that from plants into the aquatic animals. उसके बाद जब ये aquatic plants or animals, when they die, they form sediments. So this is how this carbon is circulated between the biotic and the abiotic components of the ecosystem. That means atmosphere में present होता है in the combined form, that's carbon dioxide, and plants use this carbon dioxide in the process of photosynthesis and they make carbohydrates. And after that, this carbon dioxide which is utilized by these plants. Through these plants, this carbon enters the whole food chain, the whole biotic world. That means all the living organisms. And these living organisms, by the process of respiration, they release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. And when they die, either they are decomposed and released, and this carbon is released in different forms back into the atmosphere, or when there is high pressure and high temperature, these dead bodies are converted into fossil fuels, that's coal and petroleum. And when these coal and petroleum, when these fossil fuels are burnt in the industries or in the vehicles, again this carbon dioxide goes back into the atmosphere. So this is how this carbon actually is transferred between the abiotic and the biotic components of the ecosystem. Now let's talk about another phenomena which is actually carbon dioxide, for which carbon dioxide is responsible to a very large extent. That's greenhouse effect. You already know that the source of heat on the earth is the sun. और जब sun से radiations earth पर पड़ती हैं, some radiations are reflected back by the earth towards the sky. But what happens, there are some gases in the atmosphere जिनको हम greenhouse gases कहते हैं. They do not let these reflected radiations escape from the earth. That means जो radiations earth ने वापस reflect की थी towards the sky, towards the atmosphere, ये greenhouse gases इनको वापस reflect करती हैं towards the earth. So this leads to the increase in the temperature, जिसकी वजह से अर्थ का जो ओवरऑल टेम्परेचर होता है वो इंक्रीज हो जाता है. So these greenhouse gases actually, they trap these radiations which are reflected back by the earth. And this is what we call greenhouse effect. So greenhouse effect में क्या होता है, जब sun से earth पर radiations पड़ती हैं and when these radiations are reflected back by the earth, ये greenhouse gases इन radiations को trap करती हैं and they do not let these radiations escape from the earth, and which leads to the increase in the temperature. So this is what we call greenhouse effect. The main greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapors. So these are the gases which are responsible for this effect, that's greenhouse effect. This greenhouse effect, this leads to another problem that's called as global warming. Global warming is simply when the Earth's average temperature is increased. Earth का average temperature जो है, that's around 15 degrees Celsius. And when this average temperature is increased due to the greenhouse effect, this is what we call global warming. So ये global warming क्यों होती है? This is actually a result of the increase in the concentration of these greenhouse gases. जब ये greenhouse gases जो है, जब इनकी concentration atmosphere में increase हो जाएगी, इससे greenhouse effect जो है वो और ज़्यादा हो जाएगा, and it will ultimately lead to the increase in the temperature of the earth. If we talk about the carbon cycle, हमने देखा किस तरह से carbon dioxide वापस atmosphere में पहुंच जाता है. Combustion of fossil fuels is one of the reasons which increases the concentration of this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That means जितना fossil fuels ज़्यादा burn करेंगे, उतना ज़्यादा carbon dioxide concentration जो है atmosphere में वो increase हो जाएगा, and that will lead to the greenhouse effect. या अगर हम बात करें plants की, प्लांट्स एब्जॉर्ब करते हैं कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड को, दैट मीन्स जो एटमॉस्फेयर में कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड प्रेजेंट होता है इसको कम करते हैं प्लांट्स. व्हेन डिफॉरेस्टेशन ऑकर्स, जब व्हेन प्लांट्स आर कट ऑन अ लार्ज स्केल, अगेन द कंसंट्रेशन ऑफ दिस कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड विल ड्रास्टिकली इंक्रीज इन द एटमॉस्फेयर. और जब कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड की कंसंट्रेशन एटमॉस्फेयर में इंक्रीज हो जाएगी, उससे ग्रीन हाउस इफेक्ट और ज्यादा बढ़ जाएगा, and that will ultimately lead to the global warming. This global warming has further some drastic consequences like climate change and more frequent melting of glaciers. जो glaciers हैं, they will start melting more frequently, and that will ultimately lead to the sea level rise, frequent floods. So this is how these whole processes are related. That means how these greenhouse gases cause greenhouse effect. Greenhouse effect ultimately leads to global warming, and global warming leads to climate change, melting of glaciers, sea level rise, floods. So this is it for now. Thank you.